What is up, everybody? Platform Disciple here with another Weird Card Wednesday, and today we're looking at a set of 3 cards that really need to be talked about together because they all have the exact same ability, which revolves around Flagbearer, which is a creature subtype, and that creature subtype was introduced in Apocalypse on these 3 cards and has never been really referenced ever again. Admittedly, one of these 3 cards, Coalition Honor Guard, has been reprinted in Eternal Masters, but the other 2, Coalition Flag and Standard Bearer, have never been reprinted. Coalition Honor Guard and Standard Bearer are both commons. Coalition Flag is an uncommon. They all read, while an opponent is choosing targets as a part of casting a spell they control or activating an ability they control, that player must choose at least 1 Flagbearer on the battlefield if able. So, if you control a Flagbearer and your opponent is casting a spell, they have to target the Flagbearer, which means for a single target spell, the spell is presumably going to be wasted on the Flagbearer, which is pretty nice. This can be a form of giving all of your creatures hexproof because all of your creatures hexproof except the Flagbearer, because removal is going to have to target the Flagbearer first, but it also has the effect of forcing your opponent, if they want to play buffs on their own creatures, to use them on your Flagbearer instead. So it's a very powerful effect, but it's not one that has seen very much play, possibly just because it's old. I don't think it's bad at all. I think it's very useful. But anyways, let's go over some of the nuances of the effect. One thing is that if both you and your opponent control Flagbearers, your opponent can choose to target their own Flagbearer if they choose, which is a way of bypassing being forced to play buffs on your creature. But, you know, the odds of 2 players walking up to a table playing Flagbearers seems a little low. The other thing to know is that it only affects spells that are being cast and abilities that are being activated. This means triggered abilities are not included in this, so a triggered ability that has a target like Oblivion Ring bypasses this. Likewise, if the spell or ability or activated ability is not being activated or cast, it's possible to target something other than the Flagbearer. An example of this would be if the spell or ability is copied. So if you reverberate a lightning bolt, the first lightning bolt has to target the Flagbearer, but the copied lightning bolt, because it wasn't actually being cast, it's just put on the stack, doesn't have to target the Flagbearer. And the same is true for retargeting a spell. If you retarget a spell or activated ability through some means, you can choose to change the target to something other than the Flagbearer. So interesting effect. We're gonna just hop over to Coalition Flag specifically very briefly because it does have one little additional rule that you should know about, which is Coalition Flag can only enchant a creature you control, which means that if you ever lose control of it, Coalition Flag will fall off as a state-based action, so you can't ever get this card onto an opponent's creature, even if you go out of your way to put it on your creature and then give it to your opponent. So that's out of the question. So anyways, I did mention that these cards are pretty cool and potentially powerful, but I was kind of surprised to see that on EDA Trek, people are not playing these cards. I will say that Coalition Honor Guard I didn't expect to see being played because it's the worst of the 3 cards, but I was surprised to see Coalition Flag and Standard Bearer both have a less than 1% play rate. Kind of wild. If I was going to say where you would play these, because I do think that they're pretty good, is that I do think that you could fit Coalition Flag into a SRAM deck. I actually have a SRAM deck that I might try to get a Coalition Flag for, because it's really interesting because it's kind of like it gives hexproof to your other creatures, and it also forces your opponent to play buffs on your creatures if they have buffs, or I guess more specifically forces them to not play their buffs until they've addressed your Flagbearer. So it's an interesting effect, and SRAM makes the cost of having it in your deck very low because the card will just replace itself. And the other thing for the other card for Standard Bearer is I think that you could really run this in any human tribal deck. There's not really any specific commander that caters to humans more than any other at the moment. I mean, I suppose you could argue that Morphon, I believe it is it Morphon? It's Morophon. I'm sorry. Morophon is kind of like a human tribal commander, but that's besides the point. The card could be used in a human tribal commander deck because in addition to the Flagbearer subtype, it has human subtype, and once again, I think the effect of giving all your other creatures hexproof is pretty desirable. Morophon might have not been the best example because he's 5 colors, so you can force in some other cards that would give hexproof, but if you're in mono white, giving your creatures hexproof is not something that's easy to do, let alone give all of your creatures, with the exception of 1, hexproof. So pretty cool effect. Anyways, when I was looking at this on EDH Trek, I noticed something kind of strange, which is that Standard Bearer had a dramatically higher price than the other 2 cards. Admittedly, Standard Bearer is still only like roughly $1 or $2, but the other cards were worth pennies, and that seemed a little weird to me because Standard Bearer is a common, whereas Coalition Flag is an uncommon, and also Coalition Flag doesn't seem like it would be any worse of a card. It's 1 less mana, and has the flexibility of you being able to put it on any creature you want. So I was trying to figure out why that would be, and like I said, the play rates are less than 1% for both of them on EDH Trek, so it's clearly not Commander that's affecting the price. So I decided to do a little more research, and I looked up the price history for Standard Bearer, and as it turns out, for a very, very long period of time, the card was also worth basically nothing, just a handful of pennies. But sometime in 2018, it spiked massively high for a very short duration and then has been progressively going down steadily ever since, back down to today's price of roughly $1 to $2. So the question is, like, what happened in 2018 to jump this card so high in price that it's retained its value since then? And it looks like it happened just around Rivals of Ixalan's release. So I tried to figure out what was going on with that to see if there's something in Rivals of Ixalan that would make this card relevant. And I couldn't find that, so I think it might actually be a coincidence that it happened then. But I decided to dig a little further, see what was going on with the card, and it looks like the card actually sees a substantial amount of sideboard play in Pauper. And Pauper's a format where you can only play commons, which explains why Standard Bearer had a price spike but not Coalition Flag, because Coalition Flag is an uncommon. So that theory makes the most sense, is that Pauper as a format that was growing in popularity during that time period could have caused the price spike. But in addition to that, because of like how dramatic the price spike was relative to the time frame that it happened, like it wasn't a gradual increase, it was just like a straight up spike, I have to think that either somebody bought out a bunch of these cards at once, or there was something that happened in the Pauper world that I'm not able to find, like perhaps a deck did very well in a tournament, and a lot of people hoped to imitate that deck. So let's talk a little about the card in Pauper, because I did my research to figure that out. And it seems like the card is largely being used as a sideboard card to try to combat Boggles as a deck. And Boggles is a deck that exists in Modern, but also in Pauper, and the strategy is to use Slippery Boggle and other hexproof creatures as vehicles to carry a bunch of powerful low-cost enchantments like Rancor and Ethereal Armor. It's a good deck. I mean, I played it in Modern for a while. It's a fun deck, but anyways, the deck also happens to lose really hard to Standard Bearer. because if that card is in play, you can't play any of your buffs, and your primary game plan has gone out the window. I suspect if Standard Bearer was playable in Modern, it might see Modern play even. Its competitor in Modern is Spellskite, but I think that Standard Bearer does a good job of doing a Spellskite imitation at least. It has the advantage of you not having to pay life for it, and Humans is a deck in Modern, so that subtype of human does matter a little bit. Anyways, the interesting thing about Standard Bearer and Pauper as a sideboard tool to combat Boggles deck is that the Boggles deck to combat Standard Bearer is also going to use Standard Bearer, because it turns out if you have a Flagbearer and your opponent has a Flagbearer, you can just enchant your own Flagbearer. In addition to that, the deck list I'm looking at for this Boggle deck, which happened to be in December of 2018, which is around the price spike, because I was trying to dig around to see if something happened at that time period, by Kendra Smith. I will post that in the description. Runs Gutshot on the sideboard, which I imagine is also a big part of fighting off enemy Standard Bearers. So anyways, these cards are super cool, and I genuinely think that you could make pretty good use of them in your casual games, or as it turns out for Standard Bearer in Pauper. I certainly for one would like to try Coalition Flag out in Commander a little bit. So let's jump into the next little thing, which is of course, as usual, I do have a card altar giveaway. This is an interesting one because you don't see these too often. I haven't seen them on the Magic Altar subreddit in a while, but it is a 3D token, which is actually just a lot of tokens layered on top of each other after carefully removing parts of the card to kind of create a three-dimensional effect. It's thick, it's got like quite a bit of body to it. I like it a lot. And it's a soldier, so you can probably find some use for it because soldiers are one of the most common tokens out there. Okay, so that just about wraps it up for the video, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting. Until next time, peace out.